Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Hughes. I am the former police advisor to the UN. Before I introduce our guest presenters, let me start by taking us back in time to a country a long way away from Berlin. About 12 years ago, in a large Pacific island nation in size, covering several thousand square kilometres, but very small in population and comprised of a chain of small islands in the North Pacific. They're not represented here at this meeting, unfortunately, but 12 years ago, these islands are very tropical. They're coconut palms, white sandy beaches, fringing coral reef, clear, crystal clear, warm, turquoise water. And a lot of the people in this nation live at the village level, a subsistence type of existence, very friendly, very warm, like every Pacific island nation. A couple of fishermen went down to the beach in this village in one of these remote islands one morning and found washed up on the beach something very unusual. There were several well-wrapped packages weighing about 1 kilo. They took these packages dutifully back to the village, where the elders and the chief of the village met. They opened one of these packages and found that it contained white powder. They were completely oblivious to what it might be. Then some of the women determined that in fact it was laundry detergent, that this gift had been washed up on their beach. It was laundry detergent. They took a parcel with the white powder down to the local river with some washing, and as expected, it actually did a great job, cleaned their clothes beautifully, so they were delighted with this, and word quickly spread around the islands about this fortune of having this several kilos of washing powder being found on this beach. Word got back to the capital, the authorities became aware of it, they sent a team down, suspicious about what these parcels may be. They negotiated with the village chief saying, they're not your packages, we'll take them, thank you. They took them back to the capital, and with the assistance of international partners, law enforcement partners, the substance was analysed, and I'm sure it'll come as no surprise, it was cocaine. Why do I raise this? There's a couple of things we can learn from this. First of all, that in less sophisticated societies, unusual events are more easily brought to the notice of authorities than in sophisticated parts of the world. And secondly, that organised crime often is not so organised. It can be quite disorganised, particularly in post-conflict or fragile states recovering from conflict. People walking around are often questioned by local authorities, by international authorities like UN police. What we have to do, I believe, is to make sure that they ask the right questions, that they see the right signals and identify unusual behaviour. And we can prevent, in many cases, organised crime or disorganised crime at that particular stage of its evolution from getting a foothold. And really that's what I believe this is all about. And I'm very privileged to introduce to you our three guest speakers who have had a wealth of experience in this area and will address the conference from a range of perspectives. I'll introduce the three speakers before each of them starts right now. The first speaker is Mr. Eldo Lale-Demos, who is the Director of Operations for UNODC. Eldo was born in Germany. He's a national of Uruguay, well qualified academically. He speaks 5 languages fluently. He's worked in Washington. He's worked with the United Nations starting in 1985 with the International Maritime Organization in the UK. He's worked in that capacity as Program Officer for Latin America and then as Coordinator in the Division of Technical Cooperation. He's worked in UNODC from 1992 to 2003 in Vienna at the headquarters, in Latin America capacity, Caribbean, then as Chief for Sub-Saharan Africa, and finally as the officer in charge of operations. He's worked for several years as the UNODC representative in Peru and Ecuador and in Colombia, the largest field office for program delivery in UNODC terms. In June of this year, he was appointed as Director of Operations for UNODC. Our second speaker is Mr. Bill Elliott. Mr. Bill Elliott has a professional background in law in Canada. He was, in fact, a Queen's Counsel before joining the Canadian Public Service, where he worked in a range of capacities, providing legal advice, but also, as his career developed, providing advice on national security issues to the Government of Canada, including to the Prime Minister. He became the 22nd Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in 2007. Between 2009 and 2011, he was elected as a member of Interpol's Executive Committee, and in November of last year, he was appointed as the Special Representative of Interpol to the United Nations. Our final speaker is Mr. Gary Bullard from ICITAP, which is the International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program. Mr. Bullard, Gary has nearly 32 years of law enforcement experience in the United States and abroad. 15 years of that experience was in the United States in a training environment as a director of a number of programs in Vermont and Virginia. He's worked in law enforcement development projects in post-conflict missions and in emerging democracies since 1999 in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iraq, Afghanistan and Jordan. Since July of last year, Gary has served as ICITAP's police liaison officer in Stuttgart, Germany, where he provides coordination for and awareness of the organisation's assistance activities in Europe and Eurasia. Prior to arriving in Germany, he worked for 2 years as ICITAP's senior law enforcement advisor in Albania. Later this year, Mr. Bullard will assume the duties of Assistant Director for ICITAP's headquarters, regional operations for Europe, Eurasia, Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm sure you'll agree we are indeed privileged to have 3 such well-qualified and exceptionally experienced speakers to address the subject of organised crime in post-conflict states and the role of international police peacekeepers. So let me now hand the floor over to our first speaker. Hold on.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for your very generous introduction. Excellencies, dear law enforcement officials from quite a number of countries here present, UN colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me indeed great pleasure to address this conference on behalf of Mr. Yuri Fedotov, the Executive Director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and to extend to you all his very best wishes, as well as our wholehearted thanks to the government of Germany for organizing this important conference. International police peacekeeping officers, we all are aware, must tackle a host of social, political, and operational challenges when working in states or locations that are affected by conflict or are in crisis situations. Bearing in mind the specific subject of our session today, let me focus on just some of these factors, such as poor economic prospects, weak governance, unpredictable rule of law, pervasive insecurity, and corruption. The reason we mention these vulnerabilities is because, if not tackled head-on, they tend to offer a breeding ground for organized crime to develop and to flourish. But crime also deepens vulnerabilities. It penetrates state institutions, undermines pluralistic governance, distorts economic recovery, diverts resources away from social development, and weakens state presence and control over its territory. Organized crime is clearly what we call a peace spoiler, with the potential to delay peacekeeping and peace-building efforts, and even to deny them any lasting prospects for success. Indeed, over the past decade, the nexus between crime and the vulnerabilities of states in conflict has been the subject of a growing body of literature and research. As far as our office is concerned, we interact with the United Nations, with other partners, Interpol, on the premise that transnational organized crime, such as trafficking in drugs, trafficking in human beings, trafficking in arms and munitions, in natural resources, including the related corruption and money laundering aspects, that these are serious threats and obstacles to communal peace, security, and prosperity. In 2004, the UN High-Level Panel on Threats, Challenges, and Change identified transnational organized crime as one of the 6 clusters of threats which the international community must pay attention to in the context of any major development, peace-building, or peacekeeping initiative. In fact, the issues of drug trafficking, piracy, and organized crime in West Africa, for example, and to a lesser extent in Central Asia, are now debated frequently in the UN Security Council, and so in 2010, the Security Council invited the United Nations Secretary General to mainstream the fight against organized crime into the work of the United Nations in general. The Security Council also requested that organized crime threats be addressed explicitly in the elaboration of conflict prevention strategies, of conflict analyses, and in the planning and assessment of integrated missions. In March 2011, the Secretary General established a UN System Task Force on Transnational Organized Crime and Drug Trafficking, co-chaired by the UNODC and the UN Department of Political Affairs, precisely to profile crime and drug trafficking as evident threats to stability and to security. The Peace-Building Commission has also recognized and mainstreamed transnational organized crime, including drug trafficking, into peace-building agendas with particular focus in post-conflict scenarios in West Africa. Also in March of 2011, UNODC and DPKO committed to a joint plan of action which provides for the mutual provision of information and expertise, as well as for the implementation of joint training for law enforcement and judicial officers involved in peacekeeping operations. The 2 entities have also agreed to jointly brief the Security Council on the links between peace, security, and organized crime. Our common concerns seem justified if we look, for example, at the developments in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been hosting a major UN peacekeeping mission for quite some time. No doubt, conflict has declined in the DRC and meaningful progress has been achieved. However, much of the current violence in the eastern region of the country is tied to activities such as trafficking in minerals and other forms of contraband, which are all made possible by the weakness of state institutions. The illicit trade in Congolese gold alone is probably worth an estimated $120 million. Other sources of illegal income include trafficking in cannabis, in timber, and in wildlife. These organized criminal activities enrich the coffers of illegal armed groups, as well as of corrupt elements in the military, all of whom have a vested interest in maintaining a state of lawlessness and weak governance. While tackling instability in the eastern DRC has heavily focused on the military, it has become clear that law enforcement and policing are also essential components of peacekeeping in that country. As crime and conflict converges in fragile states, UN peace operations indeed offer a key opportunity to address both of them. This is illustrated in many crime-related mandates given to peace operations in recent years. For example, gang clearing in Haiti, fighting illicit arms trafficking in the DRC, tackling black markets in Timor-Leste, or fighting drug trafficking in Guinea-Bissau. Understanding the nature, scope, and mechanics of organized crime, as well as its concrete social impact on societies, constitutes clearly the first step we must all take as we prepare to address crime in a peacekeeping or in any other context. As a lead UN agency on crime data collection and analysis, UNODC has in recent years stepped up significantly its efforts to produce global, regional, and country-based knowledge and data on the main aspects of our mandates. These works include the 2010 report on the globalization of crime, a transnational organized crime assessment, as well as the subsequent regional threat assessments, of which 2 have already been published, one for Central Africa, the other one for Central America and the Caribbean, and 3 threat assessments are to be released in the coming months, namely for West Africa, for Eastern Africa, and for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The main purpose of these assessments is to inform and to enrich policy and program development within and outside the UN system. Building on these UNODC reports, the UN System Task Force on Transnational Organized Crime and Drug Trafficking plans a UN-wide partnership for the preparation, on the one hand, of a global assessment of crime threats, and on the other hand, the elaboration of concrete system-wide recommendations for actions, all due in 2013 and 2014. But the mapping of threats and the production of information, whilst all essential, are not sufficient. The fight against organized crime in peacekeeping context requires the existence also of organized crime expertise within peace operations. As we have heard yesterday, the numbers of peacekeeping police has experienced a staggering growth, indeed doubling in the past decade to over 13,500 men and women currently deployed across various peace operations. In this context of growth and change, DPKO and UNODC have jointly released an updated handbook on criminal justice standards for United Nations police, designed as a code of conduct for police operations under the UN flag, but also as a reference tool to help national authorities improve policing, regardless of whether they are investigating, arresting, or protecting victims. In terms of specialized organized crime capacity, DPKO and UNODC have explored the possibility of embedding crime experts within field operations, thereby improving information gathering in crime trends and simultaneously helping the host country build the technical and operational capacities it requires under their national crime-fighting agencies. In July 2009, UNODC, DPA, DPKO, and Interpol launched the West African Coast Initiative, our acronym is WASI, with the primary aim of containing or reducing drug trafficking in this region. As we know, tons of cocaine are smuggled yearly by organized crime groups in South America through the weakened countries of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea-Bissau, as these drugs make their way to end markets, mostly in Europe. In fact, under WASI, transnational crime units, or TCUs, have been established in these 3 countries in order to strengthen police capacity and to promote cross-border law enforcement cooperation in the fields of forensic, of border management, and of countering money laundering. Progress made so far has inspired similar initiatives in Eastern Africa, where TCUs will be established in Djibouti, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Mauritius, in Tanzania, and also in Uganda. But beyond policing and law enforcement, fighting organized crime requires also an efficient, fair and humane criminal justice system, an effective prosecution that benefits from good coordination with the police, it requires an independent and uncorrupted judiciary, requires secure witness protection schemes, and the availability of defense lawyers and the provision of legal aid, as well as capacity to detain suspects and to imprison offenders in secure and humane conditions. The UNODC counter-piracy program provides one example of the needs and challenges of supporting the delivery of justice in a so-called failed state context. The program was established in 2009 to help deal with pirates arrested off the coast of Somalia, and while UNDP focused on long-term efforts to build the capacity of Somalia's judiciary, UNODC has been supporting regional states, Kenya, Seychelles, Mauritius, and Tanzania, in the detention, prosecution, and trial of suspects. This includes legislative reform, ensuring the availability of interpreters and defense lawyers, the arranging of travel of witnesses to courts, the training and mentoring of prosecutors and judges, and the improvement of conditions in prisons. The program also supports the repatriation of convicted pirates to serve their sentence in Somalia, while assisting with the construction and the management of prisons in that country. In closing, I want to emphasize the importance of preventing organized crime by building also social resistance to it. In Somalia, again, UNODC works with local communities, with elders and other traditional authorities to build social support to the fight against piracy and to diminish social acceptance toward it. Although the outcome of these efforts cannot as easily be measured as, for example, arrests or trials or convictions or imprisonment, building social resistance to crime as a complement, of course, to sound law enforcement and to effective justice systems, have proven productive in many communities to achieve safer, healthier lifestyles. And that's basically, Andrew, the thought with which I wanted to finish here. I know we have a little pressed for times, but I'm quite willing and happy to deal with questions at a later stage. Thank you very much.
Guten Tag, buenos dias. Je suis très heureux d'être ici parmi vous et d'avoir l'occasion d'expliquer brièvement la perspective d'Interpol. I'd like to start by talking briefly about Interpol and the work we do with respect to serious and organized crime, as well as Interpol's work with the United Nations. I'll then make some observations based not on my current role as Special Representative of Interpol to the United Nations, but on my previous experience as Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Interpol is the world's largest international police organization. What we now know as Interpol was first established in 1923 as a small collection of European police services who were looking for new and more effective ways to deal with criminals who fled from one jurisdiction to another or who operated across borders. It has become a truly global organization. Interpol has 190 member countries, almost as many as the United Nations has member states. In fact, most nations are members of both Interpol and of the United Nations. Interpol facilitates cross-border police cooperation and supports a broad range of organizations whose mission is to combat or prevent crime. Each member country maintains a national central bureau which is connected to Interpol's global secure communications network known as I-24/7, the central link with Interpol and between member countries. Just as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, for example, maintains an array of national databases, including criminal records, fingerprints, and DNA, to name a few, Interpol maintains global databases collecting information from our member countries and making it accessible to law enforcement around the world. I-24/7 is also an interactive communications network. Central components of Interpol's communications are Interpol notices. The Interpol notice system is among the best known of Interpol's tools. They serve as alerts circulated to law enforcement worldwide to notify them about individuals and threats. A red notice, for example, provides information about an individual suspected or convicted of a serious criminal offense. Interpol's mission is also to be available to respond 24 hours a day to the needs of our member countries through our command and coordination centers, and to provide operational support when it's requested. The organization also assists member countries through criminal intelligence analysis. Capacity building is another high priority for Interpol, and we provide a broad range of training to law enforcement around the world. Interpol is also able to provide forensic and biometric services to assist with crime scenes, disaster victim identification, and identity checks. In urgent situations where operational assistance is requested, we can deploy an incident response team. Interpol offers a number of tools that support member countries' efforts to secure their borders. Led by Interpol's Integrated Border Management Task Force, we're encouraging the systematic use of Interpol's well-known and already very successful database of lost and stolen travel documents. And we're developing a system to enable law enforcement to check passport records the moment an airline ticket is purchased. Organized crime in the 21st century is a reality and a significant challenge for all of our member countries. Criminal organizations, from street gangs to very sophisticated, well-financed international organizations, operate in all of our countries. They are particularly drawn to and thrive in failed or failing states and conflict and post-conflict zones where profits can be high and risks relatively low. Much of the criminal activity in these areas has direct impacts far and near. Take, for example, heroin produced in Afghanistan, transported to and trafficked in North America and Europe. In order to assist law enforcement authorities in our member countries in combating organized crime and to facilitate cooperation between them, Interpol has established a specialized crime directorate that focuses particular attention on organized crime, drug trafficking, trafficking in human beings, arms trafficking, and the trafficking in other illicit goods. Interpol's drug branch focuses on the most commonly used and trafficked drugs: cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs. The branch's primary role is to identify drug trafficking trends and criminal organizations that operate internationally. It analyzes data and provides operational support in international drug investigations, as well as facilitating the exchange of investigative information. An example is Project White Flow, which seeks to identify and prosecute criminal groups and their members involved in the cocaine trade throughout Africa. The Interpol Trafficking and Human Beings Subdirectorate focuses on criminal acts involving the exploitation of people through illegal smuggling, trafficking or sexual abuse, as well as crimes against children. It provides operational support to member countries and supports operations aimed at breaking up the criminal networks behind human trafficking and people smuggling. Recent operations include Operation Bana, focused on forced labor in local markets in Gabon in 2010, Operation Cascades, focused on child trafficking in Burkina Faso in 2010, and Operation Bia 2, focused on forced labor in the fishing industry, especially children, in Ghana in 2011. Interpol's firearms program offers tools to help member countries improve their collection of firearms information. This includes the soon-to-be-released Interpol Illicit Arms Records and Tracing Management System, or IARMS, which will include the first global database for lost, stolen, trafficked, or smuggled firearms, through which an investigator can upload data about specific firearms and query the database to determine whether a seized firearm has been reported by another member country. Stolen vehicles often have links to organized crime, and vehicles are often trafficked to finance other criminal activities. There's often also a transnational component, as stolen vehicles are commonly transported across national borders. Interpol seeks to address this through a dedicated unit which has developed the Interpol Stolen Motor Vehicle Database and provides operational support. We're also working with the automotive industry to develop new means to detect stolen vehicles. Finally, Interpol has a newly formed subdirectorate on trafficking in illicit goods. The work of the subdirectorate includes intellectual property crime, as well as illegal trade in natural resources and the smuggling of excisable goods. As the manufacture and distribution of counterfeit, pirated, and other illicit products often takes place on an industrial scale, and the activities are often controlled by transnational organized crime, the unit works to assist member countries in identifying, disrupting, and dismantling the organized networks behind the trafficking in illicit goods. Interpol and the United Nations have a long history of working together. In 1997, this collaboration was formalized in a cooperation agreement which, among other things, provides each organization observer status at the other's General Assembly. Subsequently, Interpol decided to establish a permanent presence at the United Nations in New York. As a result, the first special representative of Interpol to the United Nations was appointed, and the office of the special representative was set up in New York in 2004. I'm the fourth individual to serve as special representative, having been appointed to that position in November of last year. Interpol's collaboration with the United Nations includes joint work with several United Nations entities, including specialized agencies and others. For example, Project AirCop is a joint project between UNODC, the World Customs Organization, and Interpol, which is designed to strengthen the sharing of information between airports, primarily in Africa, in order to address drug trafficking through commercial flights. In the context of the UNODC Global Synthetic Drugs Monitoring, Analysis, Reporting and Trends, or SMART program, which provides capacity building in East and Southeast Asia, the Americas, and Oceania, Interpol works with UNODC by sharing information about identified trends and trafficking routes. Together with the World Customs Organization, the International Narcotics Control Board, and UNODC, Interpol launched Operation Ice Trail to support member states in responding to an increase in trafficking methamphetamine in Southeast Asia and the Pacific region. In the area of crimes against children, Interpol works with the UNODC and World Vision on Project Childhood, a 4-year program to be implemented in Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, focused on prevention of child sexual exploitation in travel and tourism, and protection of children from such exploitation. UNODC and Interpol are working to enhance law enforcement capacity for national and transnational action to identify and act upon traveling child sex offenders through technical assistance and capacity building, and combining international, national, and regional investigative resources. Interpol and UNODC also work closely in the area of stolen cultural property, and UNODC representatives have been part of Interpol's expert group on stolen cultural property. We have other partners within the United Nations system with which we work in connection with serious and organized crime. For example, we're working with the World Health Organization to address crimes relating to pharmaceuticals in connection with their International Medical Products Anti-Counterfeiting Task Force. And we partner with UNESCO in connection with trafficking in cultural property and stolen works of art. Furthermore, Interpol works in partnership with the United Nations counterterrorism entities and other international organizations under the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy adopted in 2006. I should also mention our work in support of United Nations sanctions committees, including Interpol United Nations Security Council special notices that are distributed to law enforcement, including border officers, in Interpol member countries to alert them to individuals and entities subject to United Nations sanctions. As there are many areas of common interest between the police contingents of peacekeeping operations and Interpol activities, it is easy to understand why DPKO would be a natural partner of ours. In October 2009, in connection with Interpol's General Assembly, Interpol and DPKO co-hosted a ministerial meeting on strengthening the role of police in peacekeeping operations. At that time, Interpol and DPKO entered into an agreement supplementary to the 1997 cooperation agreement between Interpol and the UN. The supplementary arrangement concerns activities of peacekeeping operations and special political missions and foresees increased cooperation between Interpol and DPKO. Interpol and DPKO are working to expand our cooperation efforts, and we've already heard about our joint work with UNODC with respect to WASI. In this context, the initiative was launched in 2009, and we remain committed to the continued implementation of WASI. And we're currently exploring other areas for cooperation with DPKO. Now that you've heard a little about what Interpol is and what Interpol does, I hope you'll agree that we can be of significant help to law enforcement in all of our member countries. The nature and impacts of organized crime are such that no single agency or country can adequately deal with them on their own. We all need help. If this is true for an organization like my home agency, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, one of the largest and most sophisticated police forces in the world, operating in a country that enjoys stable and democratic government and strong and effective public institutions based on and safeguarding the rule of law, and blessed with an abundance of resources, and it is, how true is it for law enforcement struggling to operate in the most challenging environments, for countries that the international community has recognized as most in need of assistance, and where the United Nations has established peacekeeping missions. I think we all recognize that peace is not simply the absence of war. A nation can only be at peace, people can only be at peace, if there is safety and security. If people not only have their basic daily needs met, but they can live without fear. They can reap the benefits of their labors and have access to goods and services, education, and health. This cannot occur in an environment of lawlessness, exploitation, and violence. In order for there to be the basis for peace and development, there needs to be public order. Criminal behavior must be the exception and not the rule. Where crime does occur, it needs to be investigated and criminals brought to justice. Key ingredients for this are effective police and effective policing. Increasingly, it's recognized that policing alone will not provide the stability required for development. In fact, you cannot have effective policing at all if policing is not part of a much broader rule of law, if policing is not part of a much broader range of rule of law institutions, including prosecutors, the judiciary, and corrections. Having started out my professional career as a criminal defense counsel, I would be particularly remiss if I did not also underscore the need for access to legal assistance, the protection of human rights, and adequate redress mechanisms. Yes, police are not enough, but police are essential. From my own experience and that of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police more broadly, I know how difficult it is to try to disrupt criminal organizations that are well established and well entrenched. The earlier you can identify and tackle criminal activity in criminal organizations, the greater impact you can have. I also know how interdependent public institutions are on each other and the importance of establishing and building effective working relationships between those institutions and the people in them. It is very important, therefore, in my view, that work to establish and strengthen public institutions, including the police, be done neither in silos nor sequentially. The work must be organized and carried out in parallel. Finally, with respect to policing, one cannot overemphasize either the importance of the strong and positive relationships that must exist between police and the communities they serve, or the importance of local knowledge. However well-trained, well-skilled, well-equipped, and well-meaning a police officer deployed from another country may be, she can never begin to understand the history, the culture, the people, the geography, in short, to have situational awareness in the broadest sense as a local police officer, even if, as is often not the case, she speaks the same language as those she is serving. The conclusion to be drawn from all this is that it is critically important for international police to be deployed in their peacekeeping role as early as possible.
and to the largest extent possible to support and help develop local police and local, regional, and national justice institutions. Finally, let me speak of some of the impediments to effective policing. Although this isn't always the case, as Andrew pointed out, criminal organizations are often better organized, better informed, better resourced, and better organized than those who should be working together to combat crime and to maintain public order. We need to find additional and more effective ways to work together, to take advantage of investments and of local assets, including local knowledge and relationships. Unfortunately, at times, well-intentioned people and organizations can work at cross purposes. We need to promote better understandings of the bigger picture and to establish a clear and transparent agenda, including common strategic goals and priorities. This has to include not only those actually or notionally in charge, but also those who have influence on what gets done, for example, NGOs and donors, as well as the local population. We also have to recognize that not all those involved are well-intentioned. Police and government officials are too often either complicit or actively engaged in criminal activities. I believe we need to be prepared to deal head-on with this, to deal head-on, for example, with corruption of public officials. Although we have at times seen some modest tactical benefits in places like Haiti and Afghanistan with vetted specialized police units, how can we expect to have meaningful police reform and meaningful improvement in service and performance if we are not prepared to deal with corruption in the executive cadre? This requires political resolve, commitment, and leadership. I personally believe it also requires donors to be prepared to attach conditions to assistance. In closing, let me thank our hosts for inviting me to participate in this important conference. I look forward to our discussion.
Well, good afternoon. And first of all, I want to thank the UN for allowing me to come and to be able to say a few words. And I want to also thank the wonderful hosts, the German government. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to compete with that smell coming through the door. It's quite powerful. So, and now I think I'm the one standing between us and lunch. So. I'd like to start just by giving a little bit of a story, and it sort of goes along with some of the points that Stefan pointed out, and I think it was actually point number 9. A few years back, and I will not name names, and I certainly won't identify locations to keep the innocent innocent. I was working and actually had been called quite a few times to try to convince the Minister of Interior for this particular country that I was working in to help us work toward having the police become a role model. And there was some issues going on within the police organization that really needed to have command influence coming from the top down, all the way from the minister down through. And it was really going to be through his directives to make those changes. And I was able to work with some of my other international colleagues, and we sort of tag teamed the minister, and we spent a lot of time trying to convince him to change this particular culture. And the minister finally threw his hands up and he said, "You know, Gary," he said, "I'd like to help you." He says, "But I'm just a politician, and politicians can only do so much." Well, I took that and walked away and said, well, you know, maybe we're not going to be able to make the changes here that we need to. About a year later, we were involved in a very serious incident that occurred, And they look to us to try to help get through this very difficult time. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I was working as a facilitator, if you will, between the police and the prosecutors and some individuals who were involved in this very serious incident. And we were trying to negotiate the opportunity for the police and the prosecutors to interview the individuals that were involved in this incident, the ones that actually committed the offense. And basically what was happening is the individuals were being, let's say, less than cooperative. And they actually worked indirectly for the Minister of Interior. So several times during the night, I got a call from the Minister of Interior who would say, you can't do this, you know, we really shouldn't be involved in you need to let these folks go, that, you know, there's more serious things coming down, we need them to be where they need to be, and we can't do that. And we continued working and negotiating because we really needed to have some answers in order to be able to move forward with this particular situation. Well, the final call that he made to me that night was, shall we say, less than pleasant. He was quite vocal and demanded that I do the things that he wanted me to do. And I finally said to him, I said, well, Mr. Minister, I'm just a cop, and there's only certain things that I can do. And the point being is that we don't want to interfere in the politics. We can't interfere in the politics of the organizations. They need to do it themselves. We need to work them through that. And it's really, really important from our perspective, from my perspective as the police officer that was involved, that I'm not going to interfere and interfere in the way that eventually the government is going to need to go and do that. I can only offer advice. And that was one of the key points that I wanted to bring up that Stefan had talked about. So I also wanted to say, if I may, I want to thank you again for allowing me to share some thoughts and a little bit about the organization that I represent, the International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program. And many of you in this room have actually heard of us, and the acronym is called ICTAP, although I've heard it called ICITAP and a few others. And I share that with you because my boss once said to me, if I hear one more person say ICITAP in front of me, you're fired. So I try to make sure that we get the acronym correct wherever we go. I began my work, as was mentioned earlier, in the international community in 1999 as an advisor to the Federation Academy in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I was placed there by ICITAP. It was my first international role. What I can tell you is I very quickly learned how important it was to create strong partnerships with all of the international partners so that we could move forward as a team to meet the goals that we had set. At that early stage that we were working, we were trying to develop initial basic training standards for police officers. And believe me, it was quite a challenge to be able to get everybody together from all the different countries that were involved to come up with something that we all could agree on would actually work. And then once we were able to come up with an agreement that the international community felt that would work, we had to convince the Bosnians that this was a good program that would work for them, which was a bit of a challenge. Move fast forward now today, I'm assigned to the United States European Command as the Department of Justice ICITAP's first police advisor, and it's to the United States Combatant Command, one of the combatant commands that we have. I am the first police advisor that we have ever assigned to one of the combatant commands, which means basically, what am I doing there, and what's the purpose, and you know, what am I trying to accomplish? And I probably get that asked every day by somebody. What I want to use is a little analogy that the senior political advisor has said to me several different times. The military has this wonderful ability to walk up on a bee's nest, a big bee's nest, and then, you know, they've got to take care of this bee's nest because it's a problem. So what do? They throw a grenade in the middle of this bee's nest. Well, the bottom line is, what happens to the survivors? The survivors, those bees are extremely angry, and they're going to go somewhere. So that's really what my purpose is in the EUCOM and the DoD arena, is to try to help direct the military and you know, basically provide them advice on the rule of law and how we might be able to move and gain some of their assets to move things forward in the areas that we want them to. The best other explanation I can provide as to why I'm there comes from a RAND article, 2005, called Establishing Law and Order After Conflict by Jones, Wilson, Rathmel, and Riley. On page 26 of that document, it says, in sum, establishing security after major combat operations should be the most immediate concern of policymakers. Well, look back in the past few years. How many times does that not occur? How many times are we not even planning about what to do before we decide to engage in some type of combat action? So it's really, really critical that we keep emphasizing that we really need to take care of, you know, that immediate concern of rule of law, public safety, when we go in and we decide to throw that hand grenade. Also in that same document on page 208, in most post-conflict situations, there's a golden hour of perhaps between 1 and 3 months during which the external intervention may enjoy popular support and international legitimacy, and during which insurgents or the criminal elements will be caught off balance. Failure to act quickly costs us, and costs us millions and billions of dollars, as clearly as demonstrated in our roles in Afghanistan and Iraq. Also on page 208 of that same document, intervening early with overwhelming force to include civilian assets, which, by the way, includes the police peacekeepers and financial assistance, because it's much easier than trying to retrieve a deteriorating security situation when consent is declining and spoilers are on the offense. Also, our Department of Defense has an interest in working with countries around the world in countering any type of illegal cross-border activity that could ultimately result in a threat of interest to the United States. In many countries, it's the police, the Minister of Interior or the Minister of Justice, that has the mission of combating trafficking of all types, whether it be people, narcotics, weapons, terrorism. It's not the Minister of Defense. My responsibility is to help direct military assets to support the police organizations in the countries that we are working in activities that are within the scope of the Department of Defense. I'd like to share with you an excerpt from a field guide that was crafted by our now Deputy Director of Operations, formerly from the United States, from USAID, and also with the Phoenix, Arizona Police Department, Mr. John Buchanan. The document is the USAID Democracy and Government Officers Assistance to Civilian Law Enforcement in Developing Countries. The civilian police cannot do much about poverty, but they can make it safer for people to conduct business in poor neighborhoods and put predators on notice that criminal acts will not be tolerated. The civilian police cannot do much about the quality of education, but they can make it safe for the students to go to school and come home from school and be safe while they're in school. The civilian police cannot do much about the number of single-parent families, but they can intervene when violence occurs in the home. But this is not just about the civilian police. Their tools are limited, and their workload is often unmanageable. If, along with the civilian police, other community cornerstones contribute to an environment in which law-abiding citizens feel reasonably safe, neighborhoods and communities can begin to transform themselves. We know police by themselves, even if they are competent and honest, may have very limited positive effect on the rest of the justice system. However, they are normally the most visible symbol of the government, as we know the relationship that the public has with its police will generally mirror the relationship between the citizens and the government. Because of the role the police play, we must work to develop the best, most professional police organizations possible if we hope to counter the spread of transnational organized crime. The United States government has for too long looked at training as a goal. Training must not be looked at as a goal. It must be looked as a tool that we have in our toolbox. To do this, we must all work together to develop a comprehensive approach, whole of government, if you will, a favorite term that we use around the United States European Command these days, to be successful. And ICTAP, for the past 26 years, has been committed to doing this by seeking professional police and corrections leaders with proven expertise, embedding long-term within the organizations they're involved in to develop institutions. Again, another point that was brought out by Stefan, that long-term, spending 2 years, 3 years or more working and building that relationship is critical. Let me share with you some information about ICTAP and to highlight a few of our recent collaboration efforts in the Balkans. ICTAP is part of the United States Department of Justice. We often work very closely with our sister organization, the Office of Overseas Prosecution Development and Training. Today, ICTAP is involved with our partners in full-service law enforcement development in 33 countries around the world with a staff exceeding 400, including support staff, senior advisors, and certified instructors. ICTAP is located within the criminal division of our department, and our programs are primarily funded by the U.S. Department of State through the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, as well as U.S. Agency for International Development, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and the U.S. Department of Defense. ICTAP's mission is to work with foreign governments, emerging democracies, and developing countries to develop effective, professional, and transparent law enforcement and corrections institutions that protect human rights, combats corruption, and reduces the threat of transnational crime and terrorism in support of the U.S. foreign policy and our national security objectives. Today, ICTAP's prime directive is institutional and organizational development. ICTAP works to build strong, professional, and competent police and corrections organizations and to develop strong partners in combating terrorism, counter-trafficking of all types, fighting transnational organized crime, and support post-conflict reconstruction and peacekeeping. As you know, this is difficult work, and often in very difficult circumstances. But it is well worth the effort. And I have to tell you, we very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in forums such as this one, where we can all learn from others. Our goals include the development of law enforcement institutions that are led, organized, ethical, and expected to enforce the law and keep the peace. We strongly believe that police leaders and the organizational culture must support a fair and effective criminal justice system that protects human rights and human dignity, advances the rule of law and democracy, and contributes to the advancement of regional security and stability. As conditions permit, we strive to achieve our goals through a comprehensive approach that includes the development of strong international partners. Through collaboration, we seek to identify host country needs, plan with them to address those needs, and build a commitment to a public service ethics and modern policing principles such as those as community-based policing and the effective use of information. Of course, making progress toward this end state requires perseverance on the part of all involved and a realization that we are not building a police or corrections service for ourselves, but assisting the host country in building one for them. Importantly, we also believe progress will most likely result when we invest long-term relationships and develop trust between host country officials and ICTAP advisors who are experienced law enforcement and corrections professionals. The trust is the foundation upon which progress will be made. Through collaboration efforts with our international partners, OSCE, UPOL, PAMECA, ULEX, IPTF, Interpol, as well as individual countries such as Germany, Austria, Sweden, the Netherlands, and with the cooperation and support of our own national law enforcement partners, CBP, DEA, FBI, ICE, Treasury, the Secret Service, the Marshal Service, and of course the U.S. Department of Defense, The sharing of valuable and stretched resources will help support effective, non-overlapping programs, allowing more to be accomplished with less. Again, our focus is on helping to build capable, professional, and honest organizations that will enforce the rule of law effectively and impartially. We do this by leveraging expertise in organizational development, in terrorism and transnational crime, criminal investigations, public integrity, anti-corruption, developing specialized and tactical skills, developing and enhancing forensics capabilities, designing basic police services, identifying and developing instructors and police trainers, community policing, marine and border security, information systems, and all these we can bring positive change to the assistance, with the assistance of our partners to developing rule of law programs. It is critical that a thorough in-country pre-programmed assessment, which includes what regional strategic and program plans are being developed or have been developed to be conducted. Work with the international partners to develop and implement a program that balances strategic requirements such as institutional development, support for strong ethical leadership on the one hand, with more tactical needs such as basic skill building and the development of policies and procedures on the other, are critical elements. We have learned that capable mentors, program managers, and collaborative environment are the keys to this balance. If I now may share with you some of the successes that we've seen in Southeastern Europe as a result of our strong international partnership. ICITAP has been involved in the creation of an international consortium involving all of the international partners along with police, prosecutors, and judges. The IC allowed everyone to work together in all areas of the justice system. And I can honestly say from my own experiences, I have seen significant positive changes. And probably the most positive change of all is everybody's talking to everybody. It's not, I'm doing something and all of a sudden we find out that some other organization is doing the same thing. We're communicating, we're working together, we're sharing the resources. Through the work of the international partners, throughout Southeastern Europe, several countries have worked to create a serious crime task force, several of them actually, involving the police and prosecutors. And as a result, has developed unprecedented cooperation between the police, the prosecutors, and it has resulted in several successful organized crime and corruption prosecutions in almost every one of the countries that we worked in. Development of both internal police professional standards organizations and an oversight internal affairs organization within the Minister of Interior to police the police, an important element. As a result, police officers at all levels have been dismissed, have been arrested, and are jailed for abuse of power or corruption. The police are now held accountable for their actions. Joint training, advising, mentoring programs conducted by all the international organizations cooperatively continue to produce the best in police development in the region. Working together with our international partners to assess, identify, and provide crime analysis hardware and software has been one of the most prevalent and successful examples of a donation or donations that has had literally real-time impact, and both on the short term and the long term. And when we combine that with focused, well-designed training on how to use it and how to maintain it, it becomes even more successful. I want to just talk about these two pictures just for a minute. The one where you see the canine units was a program that we were involved in, and it was a multi-agency task, if you will. There was one of the countries was looking for some help in boosting its canine capabilities on the borders. We were able to leverage one of the other countries in the region who were willing to donate some suitable dogs to the program. Now, why I say this is significant is because we actually have 3 countries involved in this that were able to help facilitate this donation. Plus, we had DEA, and we also had the United States European Command. We also had the United States Air Force, and as well as ICITAP that were involved. It took about 9 months to make this happen, but I'm happy to say that canines are safely in their country and being trained to be able to work effectively on the borders to detect drugs. The second picture is actually a picture of a class that is currently taking place in Kosovo. And the really interesting part about this is a senior leaders management program that is put on by one of our more respected universities in the United States, Northwestern University. It's one of the prerequisites that a lot of individuals in the United States have to have in order to become a chief of police. And it's actually being conducted in Kosovo. And what is really significant is there are 6 countries involved in the region. It's the first time I think we've been able to put them all together to do that. And that's pretty outstanding, and it's very successful. It is a 10-week-long program. It is very intense. And we're looking forward to the graduation on November 30th of all of the participants. So it's an exciting opportunity. Now, to add a little twist to this, both of the 2 programs, the K-9 program and the senior level leaders, is actually being funded by the United States European Command. So it really adds another whole twist into this whole process. In the nearly 15 years I have either directly or indirectly been involved in the international policing world, I can without question see the positive changes because of the work of the international police peacekeepers that have taken place in many countries, and experienced firsthand observations in Albania, Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo, as well as others. My purpose of sharing with you what we are about is to reinforce the important role of the international police peacekeeping in building police organizations that are professional, dedicated, honest, and will enforce the laws of the country in a fair and equitable manner. By keeping the peace in neighborhoods, reaching out to the communities, gathering and using information effectively, and focusing on corruption and violent crime, police peacekeepers can and will deliver a basic level of security that sets the stage for long-term progress. As the police begin to turn the corner in the eyes of the citizens of their countries, their abilities to fight organized crime becomes greatly enhanced. Once individuals know that their rights will be protected, corruption is not acceptable, and will be dealt with effectively through the justice system, democracy will flourish, businesses will expand, jobs will be created, international investments will increase, and crime will be reduced. As I said at the beginning, the police are only a part of this equation, but they are a foundational part that we, as the international community, need to continue to focus on and invest in. Any of the organizations that are currently represented in this room today cannot do it alone. Thank you for allowing me some of your time today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am conscious of the time and that it is lunchtime, but I think it's such an important issue. We'll just have a few minutes at least for some questions. Before we do that, can I just quickly summarise a conclusion that is clear from the 3 excellent presentations, and that is the importance of networks and that the issue of organised crime and its effect on international peace and stability is now clear. It is within the purview of many United Nations agencies, funds and programs. It's also, of course, UNODC is a lead in that regard, but it does so in partnership with those other agencies, funds and programs, including DPKO and DPA. It's also on the agenda very clearly with the Security Council, and there are many debates, as we've heard in this session, at the Council regarding organised crime. So the key is collaborative partnerships, and I think the West African Coast Initiative is a great example of that. It was drawn from the Pacific transnational crime units, which we heard from Deputy Commissioner Iskeli Lingeri yesterday from the Fiji Police, and the importance of that networked approach. Mr. Bill Hughes, one of the former heads of the Serious and Organised Crime Agency in the United Kingdom, once said that organised crime is comprised of networks. The best way to fight networks is with networks. And so I think the path that the UN, in collaboration with organisations like Interpol, like ICITAP, is the way ahead. I commend that collaborative approach. In fact, the Security Council has twice commended the collaborative approach in the West African Coast Initiative, and that's quite rare. The Security Council notes, the Security Council acknowledges, the Security Council endorses, but to commend is very strong language, and so I think we are well and truly on the right track. So, having said all that, I now open the floor to questions. We'll have probably 5 or 10 minutes to deal with that. If we run out of time, please feel free to approach the speakers during the breaks or to email questions. And I've also been asked to let you know that on emails that the list is at the back of the room. So please write your email address on that list and we can establish a network. How good's that? Okay, any questions? Yes, to the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Wiebke Hansen. I'm Head of Analysis and Deputy Director at the Center for International Peace Operations here in Berlin. I would like to thank the experts for these very insightful presentations and pick up on 2 issues that emerged or were presented and that seem like central dilemmas for peace operations in combating organized crime. All of you stressed the detrimental impact of corruption that comes with organized crime. What are the options for peace operations if, in fact, the political relevant elite and the government elite is subject to corruption by organized crime or infiltrated by organized crime? What are the options for peace operations as an instrument that depends on the consent of the host nation and government elites? And secondly, how do you address the fact, or what options do peace operations have given the fact that organized crime operates transnationally while most mandates are nationally? What options are there beyond initiatives such as WASI, particularly in the beginning of operations when host nation capacity might still be weak? Many thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you very much. In the context of peace spoilers and combating of transnational crime, I will appreciate to hear the take or the view of the panel with regard to the utilization of foreign armed security agencies and missionaries in the conflict situation, mostly for the protection of the natural resources and also to protect the interest of certain influential individuals. My own take is that this, more than often, it can be the catalyst for transnational organized crime, and it can also undermine the peacekeeping efforts in that these groupings, you find them, they are armed with uncontrolled arms and ammunition. They undermine the laws of the host country. They don't recognize any legitimate structure in those host and conflict situation countries. So I will appreciate to hear from the panel, what is your take with the utilization of these foreign armed security agencies and missionaries in a conflict situation? Thanks.
Okay, we have time for perhaps 2 more. Yes, General Wafi.
Merci Andrew. Ce n'est pas à proprement parler des questions que je voudrais poser.
Well, thank you very much. This is not directly my question, or this is not directly a question. I just want to make a comment. A comment on what has been said, in particular with regard to Interpol, and what has been said with regard to UNDCP. UNDC. I'm sorry. I would like to thank you for the work that is being done when these organizations cooperate. Well, with regard to UNODC, we are in the process of elaborating a very decisive program. This is a multi-annual program in order to support the judiciary in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with the assistance of the United Nations and with the assistance of UNODC and the UN Development Program. And we want, with the assistance of these agencies, we want to strengthen the whole judiciary chain. in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And another thing that I would like to add on the analysis regarding the eastern parts of Congo. This regards iron ore. Iron ore is a funding resource and a source of funding, and armed groups make use of that. So also, for example, ivory is stolen, and here we try to cooperate with Interpol. ADN traces, DNA traces are taken in order to identify the perpetrators of these thefts and to identify those who traffic in these products in cooperation with Interpol. And this is done in the framework of the peace missions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. One more question before we break for lunch. Yes, madam.
Thank you very much. My name is Pia Weber from Swiss Federal Office of Police. I have actually two questions. One is also related to the previous presentations, and I thank also from the part of Switzerland, the federal government and the UN for presenting such interesting and challenging issues during these 2 days. Now, my first question would be in the context of fragility slash failed states. Let's take, for example, South Sudan, where we are faced with building a nation, with building security, but then you have in the same time also issues related to everyday crime, not only organized crime, but everyday crime as well, but then also issues, challenges related to organized crime. I just launched this question to the whole public. Would it be or would it be better to have, instead of a non-executive mission, for example in South Sudan, but I could also take other countries, to have a fully fledged executive mission to take over the current problems related to crime and unrest, and then in the same time have also a component in the support to local government for the establishment actually of a functioning police service and the rule of law system. Because in a situation where you have a failed state, you don't really have, you have the problem that you have the mandate to support in building something which does not exist from nothing. You have absolutely nothing, and yet you have the everyday problems that add to the problems of actually building up the new situation. That would be my first question. The second question is related especially to the representative of the UNODC with regards to the UN task force. You were mentioning it before, and I was wondering, as to my understanding, this task force has been created now at the strategic level, like a coordination at strategic level between different UN agencies on the issues under leadership of UNODC. And my question was, how do you see the chances of actually operationalization of this coordination or of this task force also on the ground? For example, in peacekeeping operations, but also in other situations where you need absolutely to have a better coordination also on the ground in the everyday work. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everyone for that excellent range of questions and observations. Perhaps if I could just attempt to provide some input into the answers, and I'll certainly open the floor to my colleagues to also add their views. On the first one, corruption in peacekeeping operations, sadly this is a reality that we are confronted with too often. We need to ensure that the officers who are recruited into the transnational crime units, whether they be police officers, customs officers, immigration officers, judicial officials, prosecutors, depending on the construct of the transnational crime unit, to suit the particular country and environment in which it is expected to operate. They must be vetted thoroughly. We must have measures where international peacekeepers, experts are recruited into the mission from member states who can monitor, mentor, supervise, guide, and make sure that the Transnational Crime Unit is itself not compromised. The other issue I think that is important is that we have to recognise that sometimes the very people that we have to deal with in terms of the political solution to conflict are themselves suspected of corrupt activity. In order to deal with that, we have to, what is commonly referred to, we have to exercise principled pragmatism. That in due course they will be dealt with, but it may not be practical, it may not be possible, there may be no functioning court system to prosecute them at the moment. But in due course, as the systems develop, then it may become possible, and we can move at the appropriate moment and hold them to account. So it's important to gather evidence, have your Transnational Crime Unit, which is protected from that level of corruption by its international mentors, to investigate. And then when the system is up to it, and the timing is right, prosecute. It can't all be done in the first 12 months necessarily, but it can be done in time. We've learned that lesson in our own region. I'm an Australian. We've learned that lesson in our own region in interventions, regional interventions that we've undertaken. But setting up a Transnational Crime Unit early in the mandate, or within the mandate now, I've learned from DPKO colleagues that increasingly that is being recognised as an important element of a mandate to specify that as part of the support to the local police, a Transnational Crime Unit or its equivalent should be developed. And in relation to the second question about the exploitation of natural resources, I don't think the Transnational Crime Unit should be limited in its span of operation, as a personal opinion. And if exploitation of natural resources by armed criminal groups is what is the most significant organised crime issue, then the Transnational Crime Unit should be tasked, again, with international support, mentoring and assistance to deal with it. Often there is no other option. Finally, executive mission in South Sudan. There are 5 principles of peacekeeping. One of them is consent of the parties. And the Sudanese government is a functioning government, and it's highly doubtful that they would consent to an executive mission in their own country. So that's the practical answer to that proposal. But I'll leave open to my colleagues to answer that. And there was a specific one to you and ODC, Aldo, if you wanted to manage that one first.
Well, thank you. Andrew, I think you answered most of the very general issues. As a point, from the point of view of a practitioner, it refers to a question, the first question on corruption. I mean, we will never put ourselves in a situation where no matter what levels of corruption we have to deal with at senior level, that we will ever accept that. I think there are many ways of fighting it or starting it. We know, and Andrew mentioned it, these are the realities we face. But certainly we should never work on the assumption that we have to tolerate a certain level of corruption, certainly not as UN development officials. Then I would like to go directly to the last question because it's rather interesting. It is, I think, a German colleague who mentioned the possible future usefulness of the UN Task Force on Organized Crime. And I find it curious because we are right now internally debating exactly your question. I think that it has spent perhaps a bit too much time now. It's grown up and it's spent too much time working on crime statistics, which are of enormous relevance to us in UNODC, and maybe not necessarily to other UN colleagues. So what I think we have to do now with these task forces is take all this analysis, all this data, and start developing arguments why organized crime and drugs is bad for development, is bad for UNICEF, it's bad for other sister agencies. If that was the sense of a question, I would completely agree with you that we have to start moving forward into really mainstreaming drugs and crime and make it palatable and make it useful to any development agency or humanitarian agency. I think, Andrew, that's all as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify one point, and that is, don't misunderstand what I said about principled pragmatism. It's a reality. We don't tolerate corruption. It's a question of how practically can we deal with it, when practically can we deal with it. Not a question of ignoring it or tolerating it. It's just, you know, we have to do that. We have to work out how we're going to deal with it and use the most appropriate means we have at our disposal. If there's no court system to prosecute them, what's the point of arresting them at that particular moment? Let's build a court system. Let's have it functioning. Then we can prosecute them. Somewhere to detain them if they're imprisoned.
Well, just a couple of brief comments. First of all, just to go back to the quote from Bill Hughes, the best way to combat networks is with networks. I might point out that the newest member of Interpol, in fact, is South Sudan. And some of the work that we're doing with DPKO and that we'd like to build on is, doing the Interpol part to strengthen our National Central Bureau to enable countries to make use of networks that are out there, like the Interpol networks, and I think that means a coordinated approach, which includes Interpol working with the National Central Bureau to ensure they have the right equipment, to ensure they know how to use the equipment, and to help them make use of the various tools that are available to them. I just want to thank our colleague with respect to the acknowledgement of the work that Interpol did in relation to elephant DNA. I think that's an example of where good communications, good relationships can make a difference. I mean, we got a call. We had a problem on the ground. We reached out to Commissioner Euler and her office, who reached out to the field, and we were able to lend some assistance. And I think that's a very practical example of where a very small thing like transporting a sample from one place to another, if we hadn't stepped in and worked collaboratively, it would not have happened, which hopefully will allow an effective investigation and ultimately effective prosecution. So I think there are practical things that can be done, and we don't always have to do big things. Sometimes, it's very small things that can make a difference.
Yeah. Gary, did you want to add anything?
I just want to comment on the first question just quickly. I think we really need to take a look at how we can offer something that is going to change the mindset of that organization or the politicians of that country. What is the reward for them to continue on the corruption side or to move over to not be corrupt, if you will, or at least to lessen that amount? And it's going to take the building of a very strong judiciary that's independent from the government in respect to the ruling political parties, if you will. It's going to take a strong development in working with the prosecution side of the house and keeping them independent, and trying to get the police also to work in an independent role. And we just have to continue to do it, and we have to do it as a group, as an international group, to keep putting pressure to leverage the changes that are going to be required. And it takes a long time, but it does happen.
Yeah, thanks. I think I mentioned that Sudan has a functioning government. I meant to say South Sudan has a functioning government as well. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the session. Before we break for lunch, and if you could come back at 1:30, please. The organisers asked me to pass it on. Would you please join me in thanking our presenters?